If you were born before 1966, you're standing inside a 6-year window right now, and it's closing whether you notice it or not. The standard advice is to log into the government pension portal, look at every year flagged as a gap in your national insurance record, and buy every single one before that window shuts. But there's a catch that changes the whole picture. If your record already shows 35 qualifying years, buying one more year costs £956.80 and adds exactly £0 to your weekly pension. Not a little less. Nothing. It's the pension equivalent of paying for a ticket to a show you've already been let into. And this isn't rare. Plenty of people watching this have worked 38, 40, even 42 years, and every gap the portal marks in red is a year that changes absolutely nothing about what they'll actually be paid each week. So the real question isn't, is it worth buying national insurance gaps before 2026 ends? It's whether buying yours does anything at all, and that depends entirely on a number the government's own tools rarely put in front of you. I call it your protection line. It's the point where the state has already promised you everything it's going to promise, and any voluntary payment past that point buys nothing but peace of mind you didn't need to pay for. Cross it without checking, and you've handed money to the Treasury for a year you were never short of. In this video, I'll show you exactly where that line sits for your own record, how to check it in under 5 minutes, and which gaps are genuinely worth paying for and which ones you should walk straight past. We'll start with the ceiling almost nobody explains properly, the one thing that decides whether your money does something or simply vanishes. The number that matters more than any deadline is simple. For the 2026 to 2027 tax year, the full new state pension is £241.30 a week, and DWP confirms you only need 35 qualifying years on your national insurance record to receive every penny of it. Not 40 years, not as many as you can manage. 35 years, no more and no less. Once you're there, the system stops paying attention to anything you add on top. That's exactly where the trap sits, because the government's own portal doesn't say this in plain English. Say your record shows 38 years, with 3 of them marked as gaps in red text. Most people see red and reach for their card. But if you already have 35 full years sitting elsewhere on that record, filling those 3 gaps costs £2,870.40 in Class 3 voluntary contributions, and it adds precisely £0 to your weekly payment. The system is binary. You either have the year counted or you don't, and once you're past the ceiling, extra years become what I'd call dead equity, money in with nothing coming back out. None of this is the portal trying to catch anyone out. It's built to show your full contribution history, gap by gap, whether or not you've already reached the cap elsewhere on the same record. That's genuinely useful if you're short of years. It's genuinely misleading if you're not, because a page full of red boxes reads as urgency no matter what's actually happening underneath it. And urgency tends to make people reach for their card before they check the number that actually matters. I used to tell everyone to just fill the gaps to be safe. I was wrong. I've seen people spend nearly £3,000 trying to fix a record that was already maxed out, money that came straight from savings meant for something else that year. This is what I mean by your protection line. It's the point where your basic pension income from the state is already settled, and paying past it doesn't protect anything, because there's nothing left unprotected. Every pound spent past that line stops earning you interest, stops sitting in your current account for the week the boiler breaks, and buys you nothing the state wasn't already going to give you. If you're trying to make sense of these 2026 changes without wasting money you've spent decades earning, this is exactly what this channel is for. Subscribe to Arthur's UK Retirement Guide because we deal in the maths, not the headlines. But what if you don't have 35 years yet? Does that mean you should just start buying the oldest gaps first? Actually, that's the second mistake people make, and it's the one that costs even careful savers hundreds of pounds for nothing. If you haven't reached 35 years yet, the next question is which gaps to fill first, and this is where a limited budget makes the order matter. The rule is simple. Fill the most recent gaps first, not the oldest ones, because recent years are usually the cheapest to buy and the soonest to disappear from your buying window. Why recency first and not the oldest gap you're missing? Because HMRC only lets you buy back the 6 most recent tax years under the standard rules. A gap from 2 years ago will still be sitting there next year if you decide to wait. A gap that's about to fall outside that 6-year rolling window won't be. Buy in the wrong order, and the year that was about to disappear is the one that quietly expires, while the year you were in no rush to buy stays exactly where it is. Look at the maths on a single year. A voluntary Class 3 contribution at the current rate costs £956.80. Once it's counted, it adds £358.50 a year to your pension for as long as you draw it. Divide one into the other and you get roughly 2. 7 years of drawing your pension before that single year pays for itself. After that, it's profit for the rest of your life, which is why this only matters if you actually need the year in the first place. There's one exception worth knowing, and it only applies to a smaller group of you. If you were in a workplace pension before 2016, part of your national insurance contributions were routed into that scheme instead of the state system, something called a contracted-out pension equivalent, or COPE deduction. That can mean even a full 35 years doesn't quite reach £241.30 a week on its own. It's rare, and it needs a manual check against your own forecast rather than a rule of thumb, but if your number looks lower than it should, despite a complete record, this is usually why. I remember helping a neighbour, a retired nurse, who spent hours on hold with the Future Pension Centre just to find out her gaps were from years she was already being paid the maximum rate for. A phone call she didn't need to make over a problem that didn't exist. Before you reach for your card to fill any of this, though, there are ways to cover some years without spending a penny, and the government doesn't apply most of them automatically. That's the part almost nobody checks first. Before you pay for a single gap year, it's worth checking whether you can get it for free, because several common life situations already come with protection built in. Most people simply don't know to claim it. None of these credits arrive automatically stamped onto your record the way a working year does. They exist to protect people whose caring responsibilities kept them out of paid work, but the burden sits on you to apply for most of them, sometimes years after the fact. That's the structural gap. It isn't that the credit doesn't exist, it's that nobody's job is to remind you it does. If you were claiming child benefit for a child under 12 at any point, that year is usually protected automatically through credits linked to the claim. If you were a carer, carer's credit can fill a gap year with no payment required at all. And if you were looking after a grandchild while their parent went back to work, there's a lesser-known one called Specified Adult Childcare Credit, sometimes called the Grandparent Credit, that transfers a qualifying year to you instead of the working parent, again for free. This is where it actually costs people money. If you pay £956.80 for a year you could have claimed through one of these credits instead, you haven't protected your pension. You've handed the Treasury £956.80 for nothing, because the credit would have done exactly the same job without costing you anything. If you're realizing right now that this might apply to you, and you never knew, that's an incredibly common thing to have missed, not a sign you weren't paying attention. These schemes have changed names and rules more than once since they were introduced, and even people who spent their careers in payroll get caught out by them. Think of it as 2 different paths from here. One path is paying for gaps without checking any of this first, which drains cash right as your state pension age moves to 67, and you need that cushion more than ever. The other path is claiming what you're owed for free, and only reaching for your card on the genuine gaps left over, the ones no credit covers. The value of getting this right compounds over time. ONS figures put average life expectancy at 66 at around 19 to 22 more years. A properly earned qualifying year adding £358.50 a year isn't a one-off saving, It's worth over £6,800 across a typical retirement, but only if that year was genuinely missing and genuinely needed. There's one more warning worth hearing if you were born before 1966, and it has nothing to do with qualifying years at all. Even once you're getting every penny of the full pension, you might not get to keep all of it. There's a number here that should worry anyone who thought the state pension was tax-free. It isn't, and for the first time it's close enough to the personal tax allowance that almost any other income tips you into paying tax on it. The personal allowance has been frozen at £12,570 for several years running. The full new state pension for the 2026 to 2027 tax year comes to £12,547 a year. That's a gap of just £23 standing between your entire tax-free allowance and a state pension that already fills nearly all of it on its own. Picture someone who assumes they're safely under the radar because their only other income is a small private pension or a bit of part-time work bringing in around £1,000 a year. On paper, that sounds modest enough to ignore. In reality, because the state pension has already used up £12,547 of their £12,570 allowance, that extra £1,000 has nowhere to sit tax-free. It gets taxed at 20%, and they're left with £800 of it, not the full £1,000 they expected. This isn't a mistake anyone's making. It's what happens when a state pension that rises every year under the triple lock sits next to a tax allowance that hasn't moved since it was frozen. For most of the last decade, that same allowance sat comfortably above the pension, so nobody needed to think about it this way. The two numbers were never going to stay apart forever, and 2026 is the year they've essentially met. I don't have a crystal ball for what the Chancellor decides at the next budget, but the maths today is straightforward. The gap between your pension and your tax-free allowance is down to £23, close enough that any small pension, part-time job, or savings interest on top pushes you into paying tax you might not have budgeted for. So should you take your pension as soon as you can to avoid adding to this squeeze, or hold off for a higher rate later? That decision looks different than it used to, and it comes down to one number most people get wrong. Most people take their state pension the moment they're allowed to, and loss aversion is a big part of why. It feels like leaving money on the table to wait even a single year, so people claim as soon as the date arrives, without ever running the numbers on the alternative. What deferring actually does is straightforward. For every year you delay claiming, your pension increases by 5.8% for the rest of your life. Defer the £12,547 a year pension for 12 months, and you give up that £12,547 for the year you didn't take it, in exchange for an extra £727 a year, every year, from then on. Divide one into the other, and it takes roughly 17 years of drawing the higher pension to break even on what you gave up. Start at 67 and defer a year, and you'd need to live to around 84 just to get back to where you'd have been if you'd simply taken the money at 67 in the first place. None of that means deferring is wrong for everyone. It just means it's a bet on your own longevity, not a guaranteed win. And here's the other side of it. It's completely normal to want the money now. In the middle of a cost of living squeeze, a pension in your account today is worth more to most people than a promise of a bit more in 17 years. Taking it as soon as you're entitled to isn't a mistake, and there's no reason to feel any guilt about choosing the money you've already earned over money you might never live to collect. If you're still working through where you personally stand on all of this, there's a short, practical way to check it without wasting a weekend on hold to the pension helpline. So here's exactly what to do with everything you've just heard. 3 steps, and you can get through all of them from your own kitchen table. Step 1. Check your actual state pension age. If you were born after March 1961, it's very likely 67 now, not 66, following the phased rise that began in April 2026. Step 2. Log into your national insurance record and count your qualifying years properly, not just glance at the red flags. If you're already at 35, stop there. Don't buy anything else. You've already got the whole pension the state is going to give you, and no further payment changes that number. Step 3. If you're under 35, don't reach for your card yet. Check whether any of your gaps are already covered by child benefit, carer's credit, or the grandparent credit first. Only pay for the years that genuinely remain, and prioritise the most recent ones before they drop out of your 6-year window. If you're still unsure after checking all of this yourself, it's worth a call to the Future Pension Centre. In my experience, calling earlier in the week, rather than first thing on a Monday, tends to mean a shorter wait, though your mileage may vary depending on the day. The 2026 warning that's spreading around isn't really about a deadline at all. It's about not overpaying into a system that has a hard cap built into it. £241.30 a week, 35 years, nothing more available no matter how much you're willing to spend past that point. Retirement in this country keeps getting more complicated, not less, but you don't have to work through all of it alone. Subscribe for more of these straightforward, no-nonsense guides, and I'll see you in the next one.